He tried out for the Olympics and was out there in Olympic tryouts at Los Angeles.
I only missed the Olympic team by one place.
Oh!
This is the 14th of November of 1997 at the home of Bob and Libby Myers, and we're looking forward to the 75th anniversary or celebration of the founding of Camp Ocoee, and we've got some of the Camp Ocoee pioneers here with us, and we want to sort of get an oral history of the early days of Ocoee, and let me sort of introduce everybody. This is Latta Johnston, who's the current camp director, and this is next to him is Willard. We call him Toddy, who is retired from TVA and was in the first camp held at Ocoee in 1923. Next to him is B.J. Davis, who's the assistant camp director now. He'll have to fill us in about his background. Next to him is Norman Covington, who followed Mr. Ellis as camp director 2 years later, and who was a camper for many years and a leader in Ocoee. And next to him is Glenn Ellis Jr., who grew up at Camp Ocoee with his dad, and then rebelled and then came back, and has a storehouse of knowledge about Camp Ocoee. And next to him is Jim Hipp, who is retired from Combustion Engineer Company, and who for many years was Ellis's right-hand man, is responsible for a great deal of the construction of the waterfront and the walkways and piers and so forth of Ocoee. And oh, I didn't say that Norman was retired from IBM. I believe that gets us up to date. Now, as I understand it, in 1916, Ellis and M.L. Mulkey were at a YMCA conference in North Carolina. Were planning on coming back to Chattanooga, and by at that time rail transportation was about the only way to come. A storm ensued, and the railroad tracks were either washed out or were not passable, and so Mr. Ellis and the Mulkey decided to walk the 200 miles back to Chattanooga. On the way back, they passed this beautiful lake, Ocoee, and Ellis thought this would be an ideal place for camp. World War I ensued, and he fought in the war as a machine gunner. But in 1923, his dream came true, and the camp was started at its present site in tents. And I know that Creed Bates was one of the first leaders, and now I'm going to ask Toddy to take over here and tell us what he remembers about those early days.
Well, in the early days, I cannot remember whether that was the first camp they had, but at least I was at least in the second group that ever went up. We would go 2 weeks at a time, and we all just used tents. That's all we had in those days. And later on, we did get a wooden mess hall, and I can only say, as far as things that were to be, we had once a week the grocery truck would come from Cleveland, and the whole camp would have to go out on what was known as the road at that time, and we pushed that truck all the way from the road into camp. That was just to get our supplies. And it was just part of them. Anyway, our cooks in those days was Ed Meyer and Eunice. They were cooks at Ocoee School at the time, and during the summer they would come there. Now, they always, as the camp went on after the first year, they would store canoes in a barn that was 2 or 3 miles away. I've forgotten just where it was. But they had an advance party that would go up and put the tents up and get the canoes there. I would always be among the first group to go up, not always with the advanced group, but we would take the canoes down. Those were good wooden canoes in those days, and we would submerge them. The idea that the cracks would fill up, and then we could use them. Well, all I can say is that later on, I was a camper for a number of years, and then I became, I guess you'd call it a counselor, and I stayed in what was known as the Mohican tent. There was only 2 of us in that Mohican tent, and the 2 of us had to do when you had duties to do. Well, if you had 8 in a tent, and there was only 2 of us to do the work of 8. I can remember that we had no water other than a spring in the early days, and so that water had to be carried, bucket at a time, day and night. And I used to be on that, and the first year I decided, after walking through the woods so long, I started building a path. There was 2 of us went together, and we just worked until we got a path back to the spring.
Where was the spring located? Do you remember?
Well, from where the present mess hall is, go away from the lake. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah.
East, wasn't it? More or less east.
I can't tell you. It could be
Yeah.
east.
Sort of
It was
along the edge of the slough.
on the edge of the
It
slough.
was near where the caretaker's
Right
cabin
down
Yeah.
behind him,
and the old ball field
Yeah.
Right.
off to the,
When we used to play ball, we used to go to, I guess it was a quarter of a mile over
Yeah,
there.
we walked.
It had a field, and we used to play ball in that field. It was something going. Now, as far as hiking were concerned, years ago, when I started, we more or less blazed the trail. They talked about going to Big Frog Mountain. All right, we blazed the trail, and then I walked on those trails for years. Later on, someone decided they were going to do something else. I'm trying to think of something, trying to get it in some sort of an order. But we were going to go to Copper Hill. And so a group of us, we not only walked to Big Frog and spent the night, then the next day we walked all the way into Copper Hill. And the next day from Copper Hill, we walked clear back to Ocoee number 2, if you remember. There was a powerhouse there. And everybody, we got something to eat. And a group from the camp had brought canoes up so we could ride back in the canoes.
Yeah.
Tiny,
Well, we were
did-
still doing that in
Yeah.
1965. I hiked over Big Frog into Copper Hill, but we were not as tough as you, and they picked us up in Copper Hill and drove us back to camp.
we had, I remember one trip we took over there. I went back to Copper Hill on another trip, but where the present road is, that was known as the old Ducktown Copper Hill Trail. And there was no road. We had to, you just walk down the riverbank. Now that's the way it worked out. And I remember I'd walk so long, and the shoes that I had gone, I just threw them away. But
What other activities did you have in camp? Was there a decision night back in those days?
we had a campfire circle every night. Now Glenn Ellis always took over, and I can tell you that we had a lot of good information for boys. Why he was great. I better turn it over to someone else here.
let me ask you a couple of questions.
All right.
The first tents,
Yes.
you had a leader named Lutz. You remember the rest of them? There was another one that I keep trying to think of Bailey, but that's not correct. You remember Lutz?
My memory won't go back that far. I don't. That doesn't ring a bell for me. And I don't remember all the tent leaders. So we had a leader for each tent. But our tents were put
right.
together. We had wood platform, and all the tents on the wood platforms. And I remember when we'd have storms come up, all of us had to go out and lay on. See the ropes coming
Like those
down.
flies, yeah.
Yeah, and we would lay on those and lay there in the storm like nothing was happening. until the wind would quit blowing, then we could get off. Otherwise, even our house would be gone. One thing I might say that we always had a little church service or spiritual talk in the morning after breakfast. And I remember a bunch of us used to go what we called Egypt. And Egypt consisted of a hole that the advance party had dug, and they put it right next to a sapling. Cut the sapling off and lay it over and put a block under the end. So during that spiritual deal, oftentimes there'd be 20 boys up there sitting on that sapling, and it was the one in the middle of it was just squatting down. You all remember a lot
We
of
always
that.
had buildings we went into, Egypt, as I recall.
No, there was no. In other words, if it was a rainy day and you had to go, that was the only place. You just went in the rain. We had no raincoats, no umbrellas, no nothing.
Well, when was the mess hall built? We might get to that.
You are can't answer.
I think on the plat, it says, what, 1937?
I was gonna say
Seven and
38.
I just remember a
Yeah,
wooden mess hall,
I think
but I
it
don't
says
remember the years
38.
it came in there.
We're going-
Do you remember pouring hot cocoa down the trough formed by holding up the
Oh, we
edge of
hold
the
up.
oilcloth to somebody's
Drown
mouth?
somebody along the way, that was quite a sport.
And Sonny can bear me out on this, and you can too. I remember being in a camp, a situation where we were in tents, and there was a group coming up from Chattanooga, and the leaders didn't tell us that that people were coming from Chattanooga, but they told us they'd planned a trip to up Sugarloaf. And we were going to spend the night up there, and they allowed us to take canoes, and we went down, and Mr. Edwards ran a store down there at the dam, and at that time I believe it belonged to Tennessee Electric Power Company, and we bought spondulics from the store, and then they hiked us up to Sugarloaf.
To the hotel, Sugarloaf.
Pseudo hotel.
Always a hotel up there.
Old man Edwards
But there was a hotel in the early days at Parkville.
Oh, yeah, Parksville, yeah, there's
I don't
a
know
big
what-
inn, yeah.
Yeah, that was the end.
Yeah. A big tennis court behind it.
But I remember old man Edwards told us that there'd been a circus or something that at one of the towns around there, and that there was a bear out that got in the way, and they'd last seen it on the backside of Sugarloaf. So we kept a big fire going all night, and got back. Couldn't get back to camp early enough, and of course everybody, this downtown group were officials from downtown, Chattanooga, and they were all still in bed, and of course what we find out is that they put us up on Sugarloaf so there'd be room for these officials to sleep. And we didn't find that out till we get back down there and here our beds are all taken, you know. But,
Ty, did you have canoes those early days?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Had canoes. They even had 2 rowboats.
Uh-huh.
And when we needed something, if you wanted to use a telephone or anything, there'd have to be a group of us go and row down to Parksville.
Okay. Now, what kind of lights did you have?
Coal oil lamps, the only thing you had.
Carbide had, finally, I don't remember when that started up, but we had carbide lights.
Do
I
you
remember the big tanks outside.
do you remember when electricity came into camp?
yeah, I do. I put it in the first.
Well, I remember that.
Sometime around the CCC camp times, is that about right?
A fellow by the name of Bischoff
Remember the
Yeah.
name.
and a fellow by the name of Murray from Copper Basin. He was the maintenance man for one of the mines. And we met up there on Saturday, and on Sunday morning, we put the lights in the first cabin, And I think that was the first one that Enzyme tore down when he became camp director.
What year was this?
And 1492.
I believe it was around 38 or 39.
Yeah, I believe it was around.
Well, preceding that, there was a vote. Mr. Ellis said, now, we've got the possibility of having electricity come into this camp. And I'd like for you to vote. He was talking, I don't remember whether it's just the leaders or the leaders and campers. He said, I'd like for you to vote whether you want to continue to use these oil lamps or whether you want electricity brought into this camp. The vote was to continue the oil lamps, but we got electricity anyway.
Well, Mr. Ellis had his office, and going down the hill towards the old infirmary, the cabin over on the point. The first house on the left was the one that the electricity went.
After you got electricity, my dad was in the electric business, and we were selling pumps. Anyway, I'm the one that put the first pump in that they ever had. And anyway, we put 220 volts down the hill to the pump that I put in. And then I had to put a transformer in to get it down to 110 because we thought about just putting water up so they could use it out of the lake. See, we were just pumping it out of the lake. It was clear water, but they wanted it and Ellis said people will drink it, and we were in for trouble. So I put a chlorinator in. It was a small pump that sat right at the side of the big pump, and when the pump would come on, that control would activate the control on the chlorinator. So as long as the pump was running, it was pushing a small amount of chlorine in that water. Now, we used to make the chlorine. And the way we did it, we got the HTH. That's for swimming pools. And it was about 80%. And what you do, you take a big bucket. We didn't do any measuring. We don't know the consistency. But we would pour all that in and stir it. And then let it set overnight. And the residue would go to the bottom, and when you poured the top off, boy, it was potent. And I remember that we had to make a good many modifications, but that's the way we got water started. I don't know what's up there right now.
We have city water right now.
I thought we ran a long pipe from the spring earlier than that. And they had a little gasoline motor that
Could have, and I don't remember
little
that.
1 long things that hit about every 5th time, and to make points we used saw blades to get the spring for the points and all that kind of. But it ran, I think, a long pipe up to the spring and drew the water from there into a kind of maybe a tank. I don't remember whether they had a reservoir or not.
Well, I got in with after the electricity got in, as far as
Yeah.
was concerned.
Well, to back
What?
up on this water situation, before they pumped that water in, we used to have to go walk out to the trail, out to the spring.
About 3 blocks, wasn't it?
Well, it was a long
Yeah.
way out there, but we not only had KP detail, but we had water detail, and you'd have 6 or 8 buckets, and you'd have to, a cabin would have to go out there with their buckets and get enough buckets of water
Right.
to do dishes and drink
Wash, yeah.
for the day.
That's right.
And that's the way you first started out, carrying that water in from the spring in buckets.
Speaking of details, I can remember a huckleberry detail to go out and get huckleberries for pies. Also, ice cream detail where you took turns at the cranks, freezing ice cream.
I think that dasher was the best thing.
Yeah, and Mr. Ellis loved to fish, and sometimes he'd take some fellas along, and we'd had fish then for a while. I don't know what other details. Do y'all remember any others?
Well, speaking of that, those early details, I can remember one of the pastimes was that they don't have nowadays is going bullfrog.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
At nighttime, frog gigging for the bullfrogs, but the bullfrogs are long gone. They've got rid of them. And that was.
They hunted them to extinction, I think.
Yeah, right.
There's a few of them, not many.
Yeah, we hear a few now, just come back the last few
Coming
years.
back.
Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah,
I used to jig from Baker's Creek, and we go up to, what is that, Indian Creek?
Indian Creek, Baker's Creek, yeah.
And there was one other,
Bakers.
there was another.
Haskins, there's a Haskins on the lake.
Yeah, that's on Silco
Silco
Creek.
Inlet.
We went there, when we went there, we spent the night. Though. We
Yeah.
didn't-
Yeah.
But and then we cook our own frog legs in the morning. But when we went out on the lake at night, when they were close to camp, well, we'd bring in frog legs and then Admire units would cook them for breakfast. They worked out good.
And they were delicious.
Better than chicken.
Better than chicken is
Go-
right.
Going back to campfires, beside Mr. Ellis's talking, different cabins were assigned to put on different
Stunt nights, yeah, we had a stunt night.
nights. And I can recall some of those things just as well today as the night they were put on.
The old king bee, queen bee stunt goes back to the classic beginning.
Fill in a bucket full of confetti and throw it over the
Yeah,
audience.
that's right.
That was one of the original ones.
Yeah. Yeah, those were great.
And you're speaking of these first structures you mentioned in the tents, well, they had Indian names. Every one of them, there were 6 of them, and the Mohicans, Apache, Chickamaugas, Chickasaws, Cherokees up on the hill, and Iroquois was down there by the campfire circle. And that's the first cabin I was in, was that Iroquois cabin down by the campfire circle.
Rotary had 3 cabins.
They were down the trail towards the lake.
And we put Johns underneath a couple of those early in the game. We had trouble. We used up all the ashes that Admire stored out front there, and we had to go to the woods and get good soil and come back because we couldn't keep the water in place. Go off down the lake.
It's too bad we didn't have guttering up there when they had the
Rains to catch the water.
Catch rain, have a cistern of some kind.
Yeah.
You could chlorinate that just as good.
That's right. I remember one time Rufus was caretaker at the time, and Rufus called me in Chattanooga and said, Jim, we've cracked 2 of our Johns. If you bring them up when we were going to have our board meeting up, our first board meeting of spring, and if you bring them on the board meeting day, why I'll get them up in before the weekend. So at that time I had a little old Rambler American car, and so I put 2 seats. I'm sorry, we had 3. We had 6. I put 2 seats in the back seat of the Rambler, and I put 1 seat in the trunk. And the fellow that part owner of Harlem Cove, Smith, was on the board at that time. And he had this old German pipe that looped way down, and he propped up against a tree, and 1 foot on the tree and the other one on the ground. And everybody standing around him, and he was doing the talking. That pipe was coming in and out of his mouth. And I rolled up in that old Rambler with those 2 seats in the back, and that one in the trunk. And without a cracking a smile, he looked, and everybody else, of course, turned and looked. And he takes the pipe out of his mouth and he says, "That's the best equipped automobile I ever saw."
Now, when were girls allowed to come to camp?
I can tell you something about that. Fred Gates used to be optometrist on 8th Street. He took an active part in the camp. And one year, he asked to bring his family up there. But Fred Gates always furnished the best all-around campers medal and anything he wanted like that. And he brought his wife and 2 daughters, as far as I know that. And they were off to themselves, all ever, because none of us boys we didn't even have a bathing suit, I don't think. I don't remember.
We went in skinny dipping in those days, didn't have a bathing suit up there.
I say we didn't need a bathing suit.
You had to get cabins around the lake shore and
But that was the first time that I remember.
Hold it a minute.
nothing, so say.
Karen Hanlon's still,
Oh, Kerry Hamlin, yeah.
Yeah.
Past chair, CEO probably.
yeah, he was the one that was head of the Rotary at that time.
Okay.
And I just passed that to you so you can see what happened to
Uh-huh.
that.
Okay.
The girls started up there full force, I think, during Jim Enzine's program. When he was director, which would be, I believe, in the late 60s, probably.
Well, weren't you saying, Norman, that there were girls' camps
Well,
before
we
that?
had Robert, we had girls up there for 1 week at the end of the regular camp season.
That's
Remember?
right, but I'm talking about when they were
you're
both
talking about the
there,
integrated.
both girls and boys
Co-ed.
at the co-ed
Right,
camping. Yeah.
Right, but we had a week of girls up there back in the 40s. That thing, I guess, was about the first girls director. It would, after the regular boys camp was 6 weeks of boys camping, then they'd have a week of girls from the Industrial Y and a week of boys from the Industrial Y. And they were sponsored, but didn't have to pay anything, of course.
Yeah, I can remember doing some of the girls' times that Bob Tapp and I particularly would get up on the hill up there where the infirmary was and yell out, "Quit now, I'm only young, I'm just a little girl." Have a big time.
I'll never forget having girls move in one weekend, and I was helping carry some baggage down the trail, and the girls were getting ready to go swimming. That was the first thing they did when they got there, was go swimming. Well, as I passed by with one little girl, had taken off her clothes, and she was naked there, getting ready to put her bathing suit on. This other girl said, "You know, Mr. Covington saw you naked there." She says, "I don't care. I haven't got anything to show him."
Norman, tell us a little bit about your time there as the camp director. What you remember? Anything?
Well, it was more or less a continuation of trying to continue what Ellis had started, and we had to continue the same program. We didn't have nearly extensive camping program, trip program that Latta has today, but we would take trips to down to Charleston, mainly the canoe trip down there. Still went out to Big Frog, and short trip to Treasure Island.
Treasure Island.
And the top of Sugarloaf.
Treasure Island by gone.
It's getting pretty small out there.
But it was more or less the same continuation of crafts and all. But Latta, you've had a lot of new things now, like your rope course and archery. Well, we had archery, but other things.
Yeah, it's we've had to look at different things in the recent years. The last 10 or 15 years, just because of the lake has become so crowded, and trails up Big Frog and all, they have logged in the forest. So we've had to, look at what can we do to continue some of these. But we've added a ropes course, probably the mid '80s. I think when Ron Nelson was the director, that was probably when they built the beginnings of the ropes course. We're doing a lot with water skiing now.
Banana boat.
The banana boat, the things that something you pull behind, and kayaking on the Hiwassee and Nantahala rivers. We're still doing camping, but it's not. We can't camp real well close to camp like we used to. It's just so crowded on the lake. You can't go to Indian Creek and Baker's Creek anymore. I don't think we've even had a Chattanooga trip in a couple of years because the Tennessee River is just so crowded. There are no places to camp anymore because all the land's private. So we're going actually further away. We're doing a lot more on the Appalachian Trail, and we still go up Big Frog in the Cohutta Wilderness area. So we're still carrying on A lot of the same traditions we hear and you all talk, we still have decision night. I'm not sure if it's in the same format it was in the early years, but that's something we still have. We still call the bathrooms Egypts. So there's some things I guess will go on forever.
Slow juice.
Slew juice, we still have slew juice.
Do you remember the inspections and cleaning up the cabins we all had to do?
Every morning we did that. Every morning.
Tell us about these so I can pass this on to my staff next summer.
Picked up every little piece you could find there, even makeup, you picked it up.
And those lamps.
When did they start selling in the basement of the
Mess hall?
mess hall? We started selling candies and stuff. Used to, you had to drive to Parksville or road to Parksville to get anything.
Of course, my memory's always been a store there, but we may have been in younger days. But it was under the mess hall, yeah, but must have been the late 30s, I guess. I quit camping in 41 when the government took me off.
And getting our mail, we had to go out to the old Cloud House to get our mail out
Cloud,
there.
yeah.
That's right.
Hack over there and get the mail. And there used to be a store then from there, kind of around the corner and up to the left, the little country store set up on a road. And they had the best Coca-Cola you lay your mouth on. Nothing like today's Coke.
I remember the Greens brought us in fresh vegetables.
Tom Green,
Tom Green.
Model A40, yeah.
Well, tell us about caretakers over the years.
You lost me.
Jim, you probably...
You mentioned a couple of them.
Yeah, I can't remember the names. I can identify a whole bunch of them. Rufus was,
Rufus Hall.
yeah, Rufus Hall was, to me, he was the favorite.
I can remember, they used to come up to camp after the war and service refrigerators. In fact, I built 2 refrigerators for them out of some great big ice boxes, made refrigerators out of them. And then we put in a system in another box in the kitchen there. And I used to go up in the summertime and start those up and check them and get them working and whatever.
Were there caretakers that lived at camp
They
before
lived up on
Rufus
the hill,
Hall?
up on the top of the hill in a little cabin, yeah. I don't remember their names anymore.
Because I remember when I was a camper in 1961, it's the first time, and Rufus Hall was a caretaker then as a young fellow. I remember him, but I don't know, I'm sure he'd been there for years.
Rufus, I believe, was the first one that really stayed there year round. We built that cabin up on the hill for, right close to the entrance to camp. But prior to that, down by the old baseball court and right near where the spring was, it
Used to be a house.
used to be a house, and that was torn down. But that was used during the winter occasionally, but nobody stayed there during the winter.
On the early days, they all Camp Ocoee back to Chattanooga.
Yeah, you'd
That's
close
right.
camp up,
That's
and
right.
carry things
Close up.
away.
We'd come back in the spring, maybe find a hole burnt in the mess hall where somebody had camped out and built a fire right on the wooden floor. Just burn a hole around into the thing. Didn't seem to care. Just kept warm, hunters or
Yeah,
whatever.
they did that over Wasson,
Time or two.
time or two, yeah.
Let's hear a little bit about Wasson.
I know Watson one time, I was there, he built a reservoir, and it might have been for that spring system, and they piped the water down from the spring down to the at the bottom of the hill.
Well,
Because I remember him working down in there pouring cement.
for those who do not know who Wasson was, he was president of Colonial Baking Company, later became mayor of Chattanooga, and became great, Hugh Wasson, yes, became great friends with Ellis, and absolutely, like Jim Hipp later on, spent a great deal of time doing things for Camp Ocoee. And I guess what is now known as Wasson Camp was originally the Colonial Baking Company's camp, which was given to Camp Ocoee. But he did a great deal of things for camp, and go ahead, you might...
His approval of your work was he always was saying, that's the time, that's the time. And he'd work as hard as anybody there.
Yeah.
He'd get in his old clothes and jump right in there with it.
He certainly did a great deal
He
for
did.
Camp Ocoee. As a medical student and camp doctor, I had the great privilege of sewing up his dog, a laceration on his dog, and that had to be just perfect. So.
Did he supervise?
Your veterinary days.
I remember very distinctly one time, he and I and Rufus were walking the grounds, and he was telling Rufus what he wanted done, and we ran upon 2 or 3 brick, and he ate Rufus up because those brick hadn't been picked up and taken down to our little maintenance house. And I remember him telling him that, those things cost 10 cents a piece. But he braced Rufus up quite a bit about his maintenance.
Jim, while we're on this subject, tell us some of the things that were constructed while you were with combustion, and how y'all put those walkways in across the sloughs there.
Well, I used to, for years, I would take stuff from the company. I'd call Rufus and ask him to come pick it up, and I'd pay the company for it. And one of the combustion vice presidents got on the Metropolitan Board, and the first time on there, he was assigned to as head of maintenance, and it became his duty to go to all the places that the Y owned and to look at the structures and determine what needed to be done, or what could be done, or what should be done. And so one of his assignments was to go with me to Camp Ocoee. So we went to camp, and he was horrified to see all this combustion material laying around. And so promptly he asked, isn't this some of our equipment? And I said, yes, this is our stuff. and he said, well, how did it get up here? And I said, well, I bought it. And if you want to see it, I'll show you all the receipts I've got for it. And he said, you're buying this stuff for camp? I said, yeah, that's the only cheapest way I know to get it. You sell it to Siskin, and I paid the same price that Siskin would have paid you. And so he spun me around and told me right quick that from now on, you don't pay another penny. You bring that stuff to me and I'll sign it off. You don't pay any more money. And so, I mean, we take 2 or 3 truckloads of steel up there at the time, mostly tubing that would have gone to Siskin Company. But whenever we'd have a good load, why, Rufus would come get it, and then we'd use it for the trails and places like that. And the first outdoor lights that we had, I had a fellow from Los Angeles, Power and Light, staying in Chattanooga for about a year and a half, and he got to go into camp with me every Saturday and working. And he was a good welder, and so we welded up a couple of long tubes and ran our electric power through it, and that's how we got the first lights on the tennis court.
Outside the mess hall.
Outside the mess hall. We welded those on the ground, and then Rufus and the truck, we got them pulled up and in the hole and cemented them in, and they became the lights for so you can play tennis at night.
Of course, the tennis courts are no longer in existence, just a flat area
It's a
up there.
flat area, right.
Yeah, it's flat.
How did you get the big piers in though, and the
Well-
old waterfront there?
Well, we got that money from a foundation in town, and we built Rufus's house with it, and we built the pier and the boathouse, and I called TVA. TVA was very, very cooperative back in those days.
They let the lake down instead of
They
letting it
let
out.
that lake down, yeah, all the time. I mean, you call them, tell them, hey, we got waterfront problems this weekend, drop the lake. And they dropped that lake. And so we'd signed this contract with Siskin to put all that in and all that metalwork and everything. And I had a friend at Combustion that helped me do that. And TVA dropped that water, and we couldn't get it all done on one weekend. So the next weekend, we started early pouring and trying to get it, and it had started raining on Friday and rained like crazy. And by the time we got to the last pourings and stuff, that water was laying right at the edge of the concrete. And we put our steel in, and as far as I know, I've never seen the bottom anymore.
Well, how did you get the big concrete blocks that formed the canoe dock in? Were they poured on site? Did you bring them in by barge?
No,
Did you?
we poured those at Hamilton Concrete and carried them up there by truck, and we carried a big crane up, and we lifted them off the truck and put them right in place.
Wow.
Been a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
And
Jim,
the-
tell me how you got foundation money. Would you like to talk about that a little bit? I remember one story.
Yeah, I'll tell you about it. But while I'm thinking about it, I'll tell you about the high diving board. I don't know whether that's
It's not there anymore, but
not there anymore. All right.
It was
Well,
a steel pier tower
Yeah.
with a board on it, high
Yeah.
diving board.
Yeah. Well, I made that steel tower at Combustion, and then carried it up there, and a half a dozen of us put the thing up. I went back in the spring after that first year, and there was some big slips in it, you know. And then around looking at it, then it dawned on us that we'd forgotten to put drain holes in the bottom, you know, and
Filled up and
the
froze.
thing filled up and burst. So the welding up with the roughness of the weld was due to our having to go back and fill those splits.
Now tell us about the finances that you were talking about.
Foundations.
Well, I had Mr. Ellis. Sonny, I tell you, he was a
go-getter.
He was a genius at putting things together, and then quietly telling you could do it. You know. I guess all of you had that.
Count me in on that.
Yeah. You know, and he set me up, and finally told me that I could do it. He said, we gotta have $10,000. You know, if we're gonna do this, it's gonna cost $10,000. And so the efforts that we made just didn't amount to anything. And finally, Mr. Ellis says, why don't you go see Dr. Fowle? Why don't you go see Dr. Fowle? So I called Dr. Fowle, and you know, I didn't figure that he had any more pulling the people we've been pulling the coattail, but asked Dr. Fowle if he would go with me to the foundation. And he said, well, he didn't really have that kind of time to waste on that stuff. So I got out all my blueprints and laid them out and showed him what we wanted to do. And we sat and talked. He did give me some time, for him to listen. And finally he got interested. I told him, I said, people don't want to give to camp. I said, I've gone to the guy that's head of Crystal. He's an old camper. And he talked big over the phone, but when I got out there to him, I couldn't get his pocketbook open. And the people that Mr. Ellis had in mind when we got to them, they didn't want to give because Ocoee was too far away. They got no publicity for giving anything to Ocoee. And so there wasn't any ego building is what it amounted to.
No future in the demo.
No future. But Dr. Fowle got interested. We got talking about youth and what the Y was trying to do and what the Y stood for and the mark it made in the community on kids and so he picked up the phone and called down there. I can't think of the guy's last name. I remember James somebody that was head of that foundation and told him that he'd like to make an appointment, and so came time he and I went down. I picked him up and we went down to see this fellow, and they sat and talked. Dr. Fowle would tell this fellow how wonderful the foundation was to the Chattanooga area, how it gave so much. And then it'd be the other guy's turn. He'd tell Dr. Fowle how great a father he was, the pastor.
Pat each other on the back.
And I'm sitting there holding these blueprints, and I said, I'm wasting my time. That's all he's doing. And then all at once, Dr. Fowle says, Jim, he said, this fella here has got a problem up at camp. And he said, I want him to show you these drawings and tell you what he's trying to do. And so, man, I jumped up there and threw out those drawings and started my little speech. And I didn't get halfway through the speech until the guy said, how much money are you asking? And I said, well, I just want $10,000. And he said, well, $12,500 do you? And that's what I got. But Mr. Ellis had done all
Preliminary work.
But you walk out of there with a check for $12,500 and you wonder why you didn't ask for $50.
Maybe it would have come easy.
But that's what built the waterfront and the boathouse and caretaker house.
Now, how did some of the civic clubs get involved? I know some of the cabins were built by the Rotary and Kiwanis Club. How did anybody know how that came about?
Yeah, this came out of board where they voted to do this, and I've never seen an attitude like Rotary's taken in the last 20 years towards Hipp and camp. After they put those three cabins in.
That was the end of it.
Sir?
That was the end of it.
That was the end of it, yeah. They give very little, but they do give some occasionally.
But they were named after...
They were named after Rotarians. These were their... Yeah. These were their presidents. William Silas Williams.
See, Pike Pass,
Side pass.
Side Pass, and there's a Munson and a Williams.
And a Williams. Yeah. They were all leaders in Rotary.
Somewhere along the route, either before or after the war, I don't remember the time frame, they bought this old CCC camp out and moved all this lumber over there, and they built a new mess hall
Yeah.
with it, and I think maybe some of the cabins, but that's about all I can remember of the deals. But they got
You mean at the main camp?
in the main camp.
Yeah,
They
I didn't know
got
that.
lumber and stuff, and
That's right.
really did some new building.
And of course, I guess the colonial cabin was Hugh Wasson again, probably.
Yeah, that was all Mr. Watson. He, he had his big lodge, and then he had an outdoor cooking facility, or another little house. And then he had what he called his honeymoon lodge, where that was his. And the other was set up for his employees. They would come on weekends and stay.
There was about 3 or 4 cabins over there, weren't there?
Yeah.
Up and down that
Yeah,
road.
they were added over there later on. Yeah, but Watson started out with just 2, the big direct
Big lodge.
and the honeymoon. And
I think it's kind of interesting how the names of things, a couple of them have changed, because I noticed the original mess hall, everybody called it a mess hall, and when it was replaced, I think in 1970, the present day dining hall, it became a dining hall and nobody ever called it a mess hall.
Got more sophisticated?
Maybe so, I don't know.
Well,
Maybe we made a bigger mess in the first one or something.
In the early days, there was a lot of World War I type of terminology, and well, you know, Mr. Ellis came out of World War I, and so a lot of the terminology is direct from that.
Where did the term Egypt come from? I've heard some stories, but
Well, you have the pyramids there. That's why.
That's as good an answer as you
We'll
can get.
leave that alone.
Leave it at that.
How you know? No, from the very first beginning, when I was there, we called it Egypt. Don't ask me why, but I guess.
well, for years, I don't think Mr. Ellis had to ever fool with government personnel coming in and going over the grounds. You know, the rangers coming in.
Oh, surveying or sort of
and then particularly, I guess during my time up there, they wanted that waterfront pavilion torn down,
I didn't know about
and we fought them for years, and then finally tore it down.
I just know that I was always told that before we could cut any trees or anything like that, we had to clear with the TVA, because
Yeah, but these people never came around camp until late in the game, and then they came with force.
I see a bunch of revenuers come in once in a while and borrow a boat and go out and tear up an old still somewhere and drag it in. That was quite a lot of fun.
Well, I was always curious, how did, because I'm assuming camp began before there was a Cherokee National Forest. Is that not right? I mean, it was before TVA, wasn't it?
Before TVA, yeah.
Yeah, Tennessee Electric Power Company owned that property up in there.
Yes.
So, but how did the property become to be in the forest, and that the Y doesn't own it, you know, themselves? Was it never given to the Y from the Tennessee Electric Power Company, or?
No, I went through that, and I don't know whether anybody else ran through it or not, but I had problems with that. I was told that our lease was up and we were going to have to give up the camp. And at that particular time, I wasn't on the Metropolitan Board except through the camp. And so they had a representation to go and check all this. And the word came back that as long as the Y wanted a camp there, that the land was available to the Y. but there was an effort there at one time trying to, well, the people around there, Mr. Ellis spent a lot of time visiting the Clouds.
Yeah. Expand on that, because that's important.
I'd go with him, you know, and we'd spend half a morning just talking to one family, just sitting, we'd eat with them, and
Well, they were kind of, in the early days, kind of rambunctious, you know. They'd come in at
yeah,
off-season times and tear stuff up, and
well, they stole canoes.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a hard time trying to keep canoes.
I've gone over the lake many a time in the boat looking for canoes that
Yeah.
either got stolen or blew away or whatever the case.
But he mended fences, and that's the reason Green got in thick with him, is that he wanted to buy from the locals. But on Sundays they'd have baptisms at Shady Beach, and that like broke their heart when Shady Beach became the main place. But they kept giving that assurance that they had free access to the waterfront whenever they had baptism.
What about, I'm curious, and we hadn't talked about it, one of the places in camping, you'll know, is our Schrock Chapel. You know, it's been there a long time, and we tell us about Mr. Schrock.
Oh, that's a long story.
Well, you give the short version.
Yeah, maybe Norman can tell you more than I could.
Well, Schrock really was the physical director of the Central YMCA back in late 20s and the beginning of 30s. I think it was in 32 or 3 that he died. And I don't know how he tied into Camp Ocoee so prominently, but they named the chapel after him.
Well, I'll tell you, it was part of, when they remodeled or did work at the Catholic church that was next door to the YMCA on 8th Street. That was the main Y in the early days. They had this big stone, and it's in the shape of a triangle. And I don't know how they got it, but Mr. Ellis told me one time, said, we're going to take that up to Camp Ocoee and just dedicate this amphitheater we had, and we put it up there, and that was it.
Well, it's still there.
Yeah, well, Schrock, he was a boys' work physical director if there ever was one, and I'm a product of it. And I'm still going at 88.
So is Norman.
But anyway.
Quite that far.
You're not still going at 88, Norman.
But anyway, Schrock was what I was concerned, we got along fine. And I remember one time when we had the boys' YMCA at 6th and what's that, Lookout?
Lookout.
Yeah.
And he had Porter Taylor and myself in. Now, Porter Taylor and I had gone to Blue Ridge College in the summer. It's a YMCA deal for summer school work for physical director work. And Porter and I went up there, and we both more or less had some idea that someday we might be physical directors. Now, in not too many years, Porter backed out. And then I backed out. My dad was in business. Now, like I told you before, I was going to school, or tried to go to school, until there was no more money. Things have changed now, but just the same, I never did become a physical director, but at one time, we had what was known as the Junior Leaders Club. Norman was part of it, and Jimmy was part of it. I remember that. And every week we had lectures, everything from the floors, what type of floor you had in the gymnasium. And then, of course, we were working on gymnastics strong, so we had to construct our own apparatus, and we were taught to splice rope and this sort of thing. But Schrock had regular classes every Saturday morning, all summer long. And were you in on when they had the uniform one year? They had blue and white socks, I believe. That you
As the associate leader, you had to wear those blue and white
Yeah.
socks. Your trousers couldn't touch them. They had to be shorts or knickers above the knees.
Yes. Well,
Hold just a second.
to have a junior leaders club that we had meetings every week, and I guess I was in the first leaders club they ever had. We didn't have all that information, but he would teach us how to teach gymnastics, with the idea that instead of Schrock trying to teach one, he taught the leaders club, and then we were the ones to take on the other people. And at one time, I think I had the greatest number of hours at the time. I don't remember, thousands that it worked into. But that was the purpose of the Leaders Club. Now, we used to have what they called a YMCA circus every year. And it got to be an enormous thing. It was large. It wasn't small. It would last for several days. And had it
That was at the auditorium.
Yeah, well, yes, I was in on the auditorium. In fact, I went down to Siskin and bought pipe and built equipment for me to do the ring work. Remember that?
I remember that.
I wonder I didn't get killed. I was doing cut off and catches blindfolded. But it was all right. That was part of it. And I remember Porter Taylor used to stand on the balcony of the Central YMCA, and it was a running track around. And he would be on that and do a back bend and drop clear down to the floor and hit on a table about that height on his hands and go off on his feet. And we used to have single trap acts, Porter and J.C. Crumley and myself used to do double bars. In other words, just go from one bar to the other, swing, doing giants and crossovers. And Porter and I used to do giants part of the time. He'd be on top and I'd be on the bottom. We just made a wagon wheel going around.
And the YMCA ran the circus?
Sure.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
It was called a YMCA circus.
And that's where a lot of the leadership came from.
And Schrock was the man that he took hikes every week. We went in, I stuck my head in every cave in this part of the country, I guess, through the years.
For years, I had a picture of him when y'all went west. He's standing with one handstand.
That's probably still got that.
You know,
On the bluff or something, I know he was famous for
Grand
that.
Canyon.
Grand Canyon. On the edge
Yeah,
of Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
I've got pictures of all of us.
Scare you to death just looking at
He
him.
was a daredevil in the sense of the word.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah,
tell you,
that's what tripped him.
Well, yeah.
all I can say is we did hand-to-hands, if you know what those were, and all sorts of things on the edge of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
And it's just 1 mile down. But the funny part of that is I later took my wife and some grandchildren out west, and I went back to that rock where we had those pictures made. And I told the two grandchildren, you stand out there and I'm going to take your picture. Boy, my wife busted up, I'm telling you, the hair went up on her. I haven't taken any pictures of those grandchildren yet. In fact, she refused to even walk out there and look at her. I'm sorry I didn't bring that diary with me. I have a diary of all that, just like I showed you the diary. It's much thicker. That was 1932. I could have brought that. But anyway, this was the sort of thing that Schrock pushed. Now, he originally got his training. He worked, he was what they call a casting and return fellow in Sells Floto Circus. Now, he did not, he was a product of a fellow that didn't get to go to school. But he got on with the circus, and when I say he was casting return, I mean they hooked their knees and their legs over a thing, and they would catch these fellows that were doing it. They looked like you see in a trapeze act. But they'd have two of those, and they'd be throwing people back and forth, this sort of thing. And Schrock got interested in boys' work, and got a little religion, I guess, that goes with it. And that's where we came in. And he started working in a boys' club, I think it was in Memphis, and then he transferred to the YMCA. And then he came to Chattanooga, and it was soon after he came to Chattanooga that, see, I was just a little fellow then. And it was fascinating to me because I'd learned to stand on my head, stand on my hands. And then when we started doing a little bar work, ring work, I've always said that if I could get to be rich, I was going to buy an axe and bust up every pommel horse in the country. I used to do that pummeling, boy, the first thing you know, there I was on the floor. But this is the sort of thing. And he was quite an active fellow physically. And he do handstands, one-handers, and in the circus we had a special table built about that size. He'd get up on it and had a pestle on it, and he'd go up on one hand on tables, things like that. He was quite a showman.
And the boys in the boys club, he started. They were leaders at camp, or some of them, or
Well, some, yes.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Yeah.
But the Junior Leaders Club built up to, I'm estimating, say 50 people at one time.
Well, Toddy, I've got a picture, I should have brought it, showing the Leaders Club. There's as many as 70 or 80 in that club. It's
I have the same one, it's about so
big,
big.
yeah.
And I think it even has the names
Yeah.
under that thing. It wasn't in a newspaper or something like that, is it a regular picture?
Just a regular picture. I'd like to have you identify some of the names on there. I don't have all the names down, but there's a large number.
I'll look that picture up when I get back and we'll get together. And if you would like to borrow that western trip we took, well, you're welcome to have as many as you like.
Put me in your will anyway.
Well, the Leaders Club must have gone on a long time, because when I first started in the Y and I guess junior high, I was in the Leaders Club with the Y. It didn't sound like it was the same format, but I wonder if it was the same.
Well,
carried on.
It emphasized discipline and training, and when you were an associate leader and you met a leader, you would come to attention, stop and come to attention, stand there until he.
Oh, we were like that.
And that's the old World War I again.
Yeah, that's it.
You remember that thing that we had that Shock wrote up as a leader, measure a man at his best? Oh, I can't even think it all. But it's quite a long thing, and it's a motto. But I could have brought that along. I just didn't bring it with me.
Yeah, we used to always sing "Blessed Be the Time."
Yeah, that was let's be the
Close
tribe
that-
that
close
binds
up
our
everything,
hearts and
right.
Christian
Every
love,
meeting we
fellowship
close with that
kindred
singing.
mind is like to that love. I haven't forgotten that.
But the way I remember Mr. Schrock, I'd just been there for, I hadn't gone into the leader training course or anything yet. And I'd been there a couple of weeks, and that's when it was up at Lookout where Providence is now. And upstairs we had a ping pong room.
Yeah.
And I'd been in there with a bunch of fellas, and finally another guy and I threw them all out, and we locked the door, and we were playing ping pong. And of course there was quite a bit of knocking on the outside, but we didn't pay attention to it. And then everything got quiet, and about 10, 15 minutes later, I said knock on the door and said open up, and we just kept on playing. And next thing I know, here came that door down. Mr. Rock had laid that door right down. And that was my first trip. I made 3 or 4 of these trips, but that was my first trip up. We go through the gym door and go way down in the corner down there and get back up on the back seat. And that's when he began to turn the crank, you know, about here you two have put everybody out, and you two are playing ping pong, and you know, he kind of gets you a little bit. And I made a few trips there, but then later I used to call him a Mr. Outside because I was trying to get muscles under him. But Mr. Ellis is the one that came along with the ideas. I compared them with the two guys at Siskin. One of them was called Mr. Outside, and the other one, Garrison, was called Mr. Inside. And they made up the Siskin building. But these two guys made up the Boys Y.
I still have certificates from that way back there. In the Leaders Club, they would give you a certificate every year. Now, I don't know how many I have, but I still have a few left. Maybe we better get our pictures and get together another time later on there and go over some of these things that we don't have here with us today. We didn't know. We're just talking today, but we have proof to back it up.
That's right.
No, I still trying to think of that motto. As a leader, I measure a man at his best, stand true through the trials, face squarely each test. Knowing 'tis human to weaken and fall, I will be led, or I lead it all. More,
There you go.
there's more to it than that.
But you ought to say that much of it.
I remember that much of it anyway. I memorized that 80 years ago. And I haven't forgotten.
Well, before we close, do y'all, I tell you one thing that was very meaningful always to me was after breakfast, Mr. Ellis would get up and have a devotional.
That's right.
But they were unusual devotionals. He would talk about such thing as what do we mean by spirit? What is a spirit? And that sort of thing. So it was not the usual type of devotion to think of, but it was always very meaningful.
I remember that was one of the things I had to do when I got my best all-around campers medal one time. Had to get up and lead that devotion one time.
Mm-hmm.
But I was given a book, and I read so much of it, and then that was what I made my talk on. It had to last 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or whatever it was. That was part of Camp Ocoee.
She would take a little break.
Willis would do things, you know. There were half a dozen of us had volunteered to go up on Saturday and clean up around the waterfront, get all the dead timbers and just do a general raking, cleaning up. And we were standing there at lunchtime, or laying around, sitting around, and talking. And Mr. Ellis pitched an acorn to me, and I caught it, you know, and he said, "You just caught an 80-foot tree." You know, and then he went on and talked about the greatest water system in the world was in a tree, the way it could go out and get its water and pull it up. And he talked about the contribution that the leaves made to keep us alive, you know, and how many things came to use that tree, some to sleep in it and some to rest on it, and how man used it to make his furniture. But he just made a little sermonette, you know, out of pitching me that acorn. And I know I carried for 40 years an acorn in my pocket all the time. When I'd wear that one out, I'd get another one and put in my pocket, just as a reminder that.
You're carrying an 80-foot tree around?
Yeah, carrying that 80-foot tree.
He was a deep thinker, I guess, in that sense.
He really was.
Yeah,
He really
that's what I wished he would have done.
gave you the unusual. You didn't get the everyday things. You got
That's right.
something different.
I always hoped he would write a book and tie the little things in nature together with life, you know, where kids could sit down and read that.
Well, he was a self-educated man. There was one.
Actual schooling was only to the 6th grade, so yes.
But he had a college education.
But you know, for his generation, 6th grade was not
good,
bad.
yes.
Yeah,
That
that's
was-
a fairly good education.
That was good in those days.